will be a whole heap less efficient. So anaerobic doesn't require, and therefore it's anaerobic and therefore doesn't require O2. Now, this process yields a net gain of 2 ATP. 4 ATP go in, so 4 ATP actually have to fuel the process. 4 molecules of ATP give the energy for glycolysis to start. Actually, sorry. 2 ATP. So scratch what I just said. 2 ATP are required to make this process actually start. So then what happens is we get 4 ATP yielded from this process. And what's actually happening in this process is that our C6H12O6, our glucose, which has diffused across the membrane. So if I draw my glucose, like beta glucose coming in, so it's diffused across the cell membrane. It's in the cytoplasm, and now I've put in 2 ATP. I'm going to get 4 ATP, and how I get that 4 ATP is that this C6H12O6 is actually broken down. So I'm releasing energy from the bonds. And it forms, so the glucose forms 2 3 carbon, so that's 2 molecules which have 3 carbons in them. And these molecules are called pyruvate. So it forms 2 3 carbon pyruvate molecules. So because what we're doing is we're breaking glucose into 2 bits, we're actually releasing energy from the chemical bonds. And this energy goes into manufacturing 4 ATP. So we're happy with that. 4 ATP is yielded from this process because we've broken glucose down, released energy, and now we can make ATP. Okay, so that's the first step of respiration, of cellular respiration. It's, as I said before, it's a 3-step process. Now, what sets the next 2 processes apart from this particular step is that oxygen is required. So the next 2 steps are both aerobic steps. So the second step is known as the Krebs cycle, or the tricarboxylic acid cycle. So what's happening in the Krebs cycle is that, remember the pyruvate molecules from the glycolysis stage? Well, they now go in to the outer membrane of the mitochondria. So if we have our mitochondria, it's all folded, the inner membrane. So there are kind of like 2 membranes. The Krebs cycle occurs in the outer membrane of our mitochondria. So this is a single mitochondrion. Plural is mitochondria. So our pyruvate enters the outer membrane. So pyruvate enters mitochondria, called chondrion in this situation because I'm just using one as an example. The pyruvate is further broken down into CO2. So we get some CO2 from this stage, which obviously constitutes the waste products of the overall reaction, if you remember the overall reaction. Now the energy released from this process, the energy released from breaking down the bonds of the pyruvate, is used again for the production of ATP. And in this situation, we get 2 ATP produced. So that's pretty much the Krebs cycle in a nutshell. That's all you perhaps need to know. I recommend some further reading for those of you who want to take it a bit further, go into carrier molecules and the such. I recommend reading the Year 12 biology textbook. It'll tell you various things such as, it'll go into detail about NADH molecules, FAD, and for all of you hardcore chemists, you can even go into, even more detailed steps. You only need to be able to compare the ATP production at each step, especially between the mitochondrial steps and the cytoplasmic steps. So that's basically all you need to do. So if you know basically what's happening at each step and you can compare and contrast, you should be fine. But then again, for those of you who want to take it a bit further, looking at, the top end sort of grades, I'd recommend reading, the Year 12 biology text. Look up things such as NADH and FADH. And the next step, I commonly profess that it's my favorite biological process that I've learnt about so far. Yeah, I'm a bit of a nerd. Sorry if I've offended anyone. But I personally think that the next step is one hell of an awesome biochemical process. And it's called the electron transport chain. Again, requires O2. Definitely requires O2. This is the stage of respiration that yields the most energy, and therefore can produce the most ATP. So what's happened is, we have carrier molecules, which I touched on earlier, NADH and FADH, which carry hydrogen into the inner membrane of the mitochondrion. This is also known as the matrix of the mitochondrion. So what's happening is, these carrier molecules, these NADH and FADH molecules, are carrying hydrogen as well as electrons, so hydrogen plus electrons, into this matrix of the mitochondria. Now this is when it gets awesome. The electrons, which I'll represent as E minus, are sort of put into this chain, this elaborate chain reaction. But what's basically happening, if we just observe it from the surface, is that high energy electrons, so high energy, are being brought to low energy. And of course, with that difference of energy, the high energy to the low energy, we can deduce that some energy has been lost. And this is the energy that goes in to producing, wait for it, 30 to 32 ATP. This is a very, very efficient cellular process and obviously very essential to the functioning of our body. And it's just amazing, to think that this is happening, several times, more than we can imagine in our body, just every second. It's fascinating. I am in awe whenever I teach this to a student, or whenever I have to, explain it in an exam even. It's a pretty cool process. Now, there's one